Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us back as we proceed to the next session on financial burden on families. Just like I said before we took that short break, we will be joined by Lynn Dadzie-Yeboah. I hope I got that name correctly.
Yes, you did.
All right. So we are honored to have Lynn Dadzie-Yeboah. She is the founder of Alexis Miranda Foundation. Who brings visibility to a reality many families carry silently, the financial burden of autism. Now, behind every therapy session, every educational placement, and intervention decisions are difficult trade-offs. Families often face reduced employment opportunities, unstable income, and long-term financial insecurity as they attempt to meet their child's needs. Lynn this evening reminds us that access to care is deeply unequal. Financial strain shapes not only what services families can access, but how consistently they can sustain that support over time. For many, the cost of care determines the limits of possibility. Her work challenges us to look beyond the availability of services and examine affordability, equity, and systematic barriers that place disproportionate pressure on families. She speaks candidly about the emotional toll that financial stress adds to an already demanding journey. This session invites honest reflection on the hidden cost of autism and calls for community-based and policy-level solutions that reduce economic barriers rather than deepen them. Lynn Dadzie-Yeboah, if you are ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here. Just
Pleasure to
to
have you.
share with everybody, unfortunately, I got COVID and I have to make sure I protect my family. And so I have my mask on. So I'll try to speak as loud as I can, but if you can't hear me, please make sure you say something in the chat box. But it's an absolute pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be on this platform. Thank you to the Autism group, Fabi, and the entire team that put this together. Um, the moderator summarized what we're here to discuss, and it's something that's very dear to my heart and I'm passionate about, the cost of autism on families. So typically, I think she gave you a little bit of my background, but I'll do that. So before I got into this advocacy space, I worked in investments. So I've been an investment professional for over 20 years. And I did work on trust accounts for people that had disabilities. Little did I know that at some point I'd be dealing with those issues for myself and for my family. So I like to share with people so that they can plan. So I come in with that lens as well. So it's the advocacy and my financial background intersects, and then that's where we find ourselves now. But as was said before, in many instances, the focus is on treatment solutions and I have a daughter on the spectrum who's 25 years old, she'll be 26. So most of the conversation will be around my experience as well. Um, so, as a parent, or when you're newly diagnosed, everybody is talking about services and how you can get therapy for your child and how you can make sure that bring them up to speed. They fail to tell you is that it's very expensive. Families have to go through a lot to make sure they provide care for children. And so, once you're given the diagnosis, the first thing you even have to do is get a specialist to go ahead and do an assessment, and that could be a psychologist. Usually, there are long waiting lists for you to do that, and the cost to do that in the US would range anywhere from $1,500 to $300. I mean, $3,000 just to get an assessment for a child, because the assessment then helps the school in making sure they are placing the child properly. So the conversations really need to be had about the impact on autism on all of us. The financial burden cannot be understated. We focus on awareness. I do a lot of that work too, and we focused about making sure there's support. But then we forget the toll this takes on families. Most families, if they're both working, have to have perhaps 24-hour care for their youth or children on the spectrum, if just to be sure that they're safe, and that is very costly as well. So what I'm going to do is I'll start the discussion of I do actually have a presentation. Sorry, let's go through that because it'll make it more structured. Let me share my screen in a bit here. Why this conversation matters. I already spoke a little bit about it. Already, as families, we're dealing with a lot of pressures, social pressures, emotional pressures once you get the diagnosis, and then compound that with the financial burden can take a toll. It takes a strong, united force to tackle autism. So, in some instances, I've known people personally who are just single parents and they're having to do it on their own. When it's a unit of two people, as challenging as it might be a little easier. What creates the financial burden, and this is where I thought I needed this, is that I'm going to speak about the general financial burden from a national perspective before I come to our family or individual perspective. So, therapies, we'll talk about family pressures. Therapies are very costly. Typically, a child or an adult on the spectrum might need speech therapy, they might need occupational therapy, they might need physical therapy. And all those therapies are costly. And so a family then has to decide, and usually I'm sure families have more than one child. So they'll have the child on the spectrum and other children. They have to then decide how to allocate scarce resources, whether they sign up for all these therapies outside of whatever the school is offering, or they forego some. So the burden, as you can see, is tremendous. The education, the cost to educate a child on the spectrum is also very expensive. Within the US, most school districts will have special education classrooms for the children. And I'll speak to the US more because I live in the US, and then I'll touch on some instances in Ghana because I'm familiar with that. Um, I know a lot of the other countries on the continent have similar frameworks, but I'll speak to what I'm very comfortable with. So in the US, the public school systems will offer special education. And that typically will come to you at no cost because that's paid by the taxes in the town. However, when you have a child who has profound autism or has special needs, there's something called private placement. The private placement can cost for day schools can cost anywhere from $40,000 to $100,000 that the district has to pay. Um, and so you can see where a district might push back in trying to place the child appropriately because it's expensive to them. So you'll get all sorts of excuses in placing the child. If the child has to be put in a residential program, the residential programs, I believe, cost between 100,000 and $250,000 a year. That's extremely expensive. So there again, it's very difficult and to get placement. There's always pushback. Families have to get attorneys to help them to get private placement for their children. If not, then they stay in the mainstream special education programs, and that might not be appropriate for your child. So that's one aspect. As much as the districts have to pay for that, in certain instances, they won't. And so as a family, you're torn between whether paying for that yourself and $40,000 to $90,000 a year is very expensive. And if you look at this, the residential, which is 100 to 250,000, that's $250,000. That's tremendous. And this is not just for a year, this is for a lifetime. So you're starting at, when my child was 6 years old, I was told to put her in a residential program, which I did not do. But imagine starting at 6 years old, and 20 years after that, you keep paying 100,000 to 250,000 for over 20 years. That's quite expensive, and the districts don't want to do that. And even to get a district who will be willing to do that, you have to be in a neighborhood where housing is expensive. To access the right care, you might be forced to move into a neighborhood where houses are expensive, and so they get more taxes to make these payments. So all around, it's never cheap for the families, even when the districts support. If you have to pay for yourself, that's extremely difficult. Most of the schools do not accept do not like to accept private placements from the families because they know long term you won't be able to pay for it. It'll bankrupt you. And so they would rather take it from the city or the state, your town or the district. I say district, I'm referring to the town because they know that that can be sustained over the child's or the adult's lifetime. So that's an issue that most people don't know that families like ours face. It's extremely expensive. We have to forego a lot to make sure that our young adults and young children are getting the services they need. Then, coupled with that, you have the therapies that I'd mentioned. If you have to go to a speech therapy, you pay for that out of pocket because perhaps what's offered in school is not sufficient. They might get therapy once or twice a week, which should not will not give them the progress you want. So you'd want to look outside to supplement. Those supplemental therapies tend to be very expensive as well. Then you have their medical bills and you have their behavioral therapies. Some children who have profound autism need ABA, and ABA therapy is extremely expensive. My daughter is actually out of school now, so she's an adult, and when you talk to ABA therapists to come work with your child, a BCBA will charge upwards of $135 to $150 just for an hour session. So there again, you can see how this becomes extremely expensive and burdensome. Even for a family that's making average income in the US, it's very expensive. We have to look at transportation costs. Transporting them to and from school is also very expensive. When the state or the town takes care of that, it costs them anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000 to transport your child. If you have to do it yourself, it's expensive. Sometimes you need to get drivers to pick up your kids. If you're working, to drop them off and bring them, or even a nanny to drop them and pick them up so you can go to work. Um, that's a cost that people don't talk about. Then the caregiver loss of income. If a caregiver decides that they'll stay home and take care of their child, that's income that they're losing, family income that they're losing just because they want to take care of their adult or young person on the spectrum. And again, that's always also overlooked. Um, when it comes to the income, I always say that it's just not even the income that you're losing the potential to invest or put money aside for your retirement. So once a parent decides to stay home to take care of their child, they're foregoing 401k contributions, matching contributions that they could have gotten at work is all foregone funding. They're not going to get that. That's lost income. So as much as they're losing income, the nation also suffers because the potential of that parent and what they could contribute to society is off the table. They're no longer able to do that because they have to take care of their child. So it's not a win-win situation. The cost involved is extremely overburdening. Um, If when a family tends to lean on just one income or a sole provider, there's extreme stress on that one that's working, and that also impacts the well-being of everybody in the household, the well-being of the person going out to work, and the well-being of the rest of the family, because it's stressful to take on that burden, be the sole provider, come back home, and then have to deal with a person on the spectrum, and it's very difficult working with them as well. So those are some of the costs that usually are not talked about. I did touch on the therapy interventions. They're needed to support our individuals to improve their quality of life, but they come at an extreme cost. So when society, so I move from the family level to a societal level. So when a government is able to put in systems or programs that support, that helps a bit. It alleviates some of the pressures on the family. Um, as I mentioned earlier on, the schools will provide some sort of therapies for our young ones and adults. However, it's never sufficient, so you have to supplement. That's talking about the US. I'll shift to Ghana. In Ghana, I know that most people do private placement. Most of the people that have their children in private schools. The public schools do have special ed, but I'm not sure it's structured to the level that we would like to see it. And so I think as a force or as a community, and when I say a community, I'm talking about a parent, autism parent community or stakeholders. We have to come together to try and push the government to allocate appropriate funding to support the therapies that are needed because typically those therapies are provided or paid for by the families themselves. And that's extremely um, difficult. I do know that the governments have funding for different things. In Ghana, they have a program where they call Freeze SHS, which is at the high school level. But there is funding in the education or the department or the Ministry of Education to help. And so we have to be a force that pushes Parliament and the legal experts and the stakeholders to make sure they are providing what our children need. We have to be a voice. Most places, it's the parents that have championed all the changes that have come in place. So from the ADA rules to IDEA, which is within the US, all those were pushed for by families. So it's we're the ones that are bearing the brunt of the issue. So it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we come together, parents, stakeholders, people that have schools, providers, basically, all come together and push for the need to get support from the government. A little support will go a long way. It cannot be all on the parents. It's very, very expensive. Also, in certain countries, or depending on where you're located, the services tend to be in the urban areas, not the rural. So the people in the rural sectors really miss out. So imagining being in an urban area and not getting as much support. And then think about those in the rural areas. They have little to none at all. So in order to get an assessment done, they may have to come to the capital of a country to get an assessment. That's very costly as well. Even here in the US, depending on where you're located, there are rural areas that don't have all the services the cities will have. And so it becomes a burden on the family to get support for their children. Um, and then now coupled with all the workforce shortages, it's becoming extremely difficult to even find providers to support you. And so the few that you find, sometimes you have to travel very far to get to them, or you have to be on a waiting list for a long time to get to them. And when you're given a price, um, I wouldn't say it's a monopoly. There are few people out there, so whatever price is quoted is what you take. So there again, we're constantly battling with the cost of caring for our young ones. Um, we'll talk about the education cost and barriers. There are limited inclusive school availability. The inclusive schools segment, it's a dicey and tricky one depending on where you're located. Some people believe in inclusive schooling for individuals on the spectrum, and there are others that believe that there should be specialized classes just for them. Whichever direction you look at, there's a cost to it. So it's expensive, and we need to find ways to alleviate that cost or to supplement that cost. Right now, there's so many cuts here in the US to the budget that's allocated to special ed, some of the departments or sectors. have just been wiped out. So it's been very challenging for families. People are worried. They can't find caregivers, and the little support that they were getting from the federal level that trickled down to the state is all gone. That also, I think the upside to that is it tells us as parents that we should put in strategies, however little, to make sure that we're not reliant on funding or support from anywhere else. And so, what sometimes I say is that these things are opportunities for us to be creative, right? So, if the funding is not coming from the state, perhaps then families in a local area come together and find ways to put funds together um, to come up with programs that can support their children. So we've got to be creative because most of the services that have been canceled, I doubt will come back. Um, Typically, when a program is slashed, it's very difficult to put it back in. So those who are hopeful that, oh, in a few years, if there's a change of government, things might revert. Um, have to be cautious because it might not be the case. Things might revert, but not to the original form that we knew it. So this is where we have to come together and collaborate a lot. There's got to be a lot of collaboration to come up with things to support our individuals on the spectrum. Um, so I think I mentioned a little bit about the private education expenses, and then I didn't even talk about the shadow teachers and aides. So depending on the profoundness of the person on the spectrum, they might need a one-on-one person to work with them, which then adds on to the cost to care for that. So all around, it becomes very expensive, and even if it's not the family paying for it and it's the district, they don't want to pay for that. It's always numbers. They allocate, and fortunately, that's the way it is. So, um, your individual, your family member is considered sort of a number because they're looking at the cost of just educating that person and they're looking at the return. So, okay, we're spending all this money on this individual. Are we going to be able to get them to the level where they're self-sufficient, where they can work and contribute to society? And in some cases, we may not be at the table where this is discussed, but it's like, okay, if that's not the case, we don't want to spend the money there. Now there are talks of institutionalizing some of the individuals again, and it's all because some people have sat at a table and decided that these individuals are not going to contribute to our society, and so we don't want to help them. Not forgetting that every person has potential and we just need to support them to be the best version of themselves. Then we go back to home-based instruction. That can be also very expensive. So if you're not in the school, there's some people that pursue home-based instruction, so they won't go to the school systems. They're not going to go through private pay or private placement. I do see somebody here to be admitted. Am I the one to admit them? Sorry to interrupt. I guess. Um, so some people pursue the home-based instructions, and that's expensive as well. Then we'll come to medical and diagnostic expense. I think I touched on that earlier on, but to first get your diagnosis, you have to see a specialist, a developmental pediatrician. We had to wait 18 months back when my daughter was maybe a year old to get an appointment. And so you wait that long and it's so expensive. At that time, insurance was not covering it. So the family has to save or come up with funds to pay for that. Then if there are medications involved, you pay for the medications. Diagnostic evaluations, I mentioned some of the evaluations that are needed that are also expensive. Traveling back and forth to centers add-on. So the the cost keeps snowballing. It's unending. You don't see an end to it. Families have to deal with the hidden cost of travel, as we talked about, to therapies, relocate for services. Some people have relocated just so that they can be in the right district so their child can get the best services. And that's in the US. in Ghana, I've spoken to people that have schools and they have clients or patients. I wouldn't call them patients, but they have families traveling long distances just to get services for their individuals on their spectrum, the loved ones on the spectrum. That's very expensive. There was one place that I visited, and a parent had dropped off their youth or their child in the morning and was just hanging around till the end of the day to take them back. And so here's a person that could have been working and is unable to work because they have to. It didn't make sense for them to go and come back because of the distance, and so they stuck around. So there we go. That family loses income right there because the caregiver or the mother that brought their child is unable to work. They sit idle and just have to wait. And that takes a toll on the family as a whole. Excuse me. We talk about the employment income trade-offs. I mentioned that earlier. So families have to take reduced working hours. Some leave the employment sector completely. Others lose their career growth. If you're constantly being called to come pick up your child or come take your child to an appointment, your bosses don't see that as they see you as somebody that can progress. They don't take you seriously when you're in the office, and it's usually tougher on the mothers. There can be a family, a man and a woman, husband and wife, we're working for the same institution, and when there's an issue they always call the mother, not the father. And so the men are able to progress along in their careers, and the women struggle because they have to take time off, to go take care of their young ones, and it's extremely difficult and touchy situation. Then we talked about the real trade-off. The trade-offs is very hard. So when you're budgeting in your beginning of the year, you budget or you do your monthly budget, you have to constantly weigh therapy versus some household expenses, or therapy versus vacation, therapy versus some upgrade that you need to do. It's always looking at what you can forego so that you can support this individual on the spectrum. Um, Education versus healthcare. There should never be an instance where you have to outweigh which is better, healthcare or education. But in some dire instances, families are forced to do that. They'll have to take healthcare over education. Um, I've already talked about the employment versus caregiving. If you forego your income just to be a caregiver and hope that your child will progress to the level that you're confident you've supported them well. Excuse me. Excuse me. And I think I told you a little bit about my background. So my background in finance, coupled with the advocacy work, got me to start looking at, okay, how can we support families to plan well? So planning is key, and it doesn't matter how small you start. I tell people, sometimes just putting away $5 a week can add up. And if you do that in an investment account, it compounds. And actually, disclaimer, none of the information I'm giving here is actually, it should be considered educational. So I'm not giving advice as on this platform, so that it's clear. So this all the information that I'm giving to you here is just general knowledge. It's not any advice. As a professional, I have to make that clear. But as families, we can start small. So the minute you get that diagnosis about having a child with autism and knowing how expensive it can be, actually, the minute you get that diagnosis, I think it's very important that you find a community. Because when you get that diagnosis, you're not thinking about cost. You're just thinking about how to get my child better. And so you forget that it's going to cost you a lot. But if you are part of a community, some parents will bring up discussions about cost, which will then get you to prepare. And so the minute you're aware that, okay, I need to start preparing, what you might want to do is explore any investment vehicles that can help you. You can even start off with just a savings account so that you put something little to the side weekly. You might have to forego your cup of coffee or um, a little treat here and there just so that you can put some funds away. If you put it in a savings account, it might not get a lot of interest, a little bit, but if you're able to put that in an investment account, the return will be a bit higher than just having it in a savings account. So I tell families all the time that it's essential that you find a way to invest for your family. It's critical. Um, you can actually explore whatever your country has. I'm sure countries have different financial tools that they use. And so you want to look out, check with the bank first, your local bank, to see what can be done. Some people, depending on the country, might not have complex investment tools, but they'll have a savings account or they might have some CDs or bonds. You might want to explore that, right? But the goal is to make sure you're building long-term financial sustainability for the family. So not just you, but for the family. And when you build two, you also want to think about, um, I say this so people can relate to it better. So typically when you're working, you want to save or invest for your retirement. When you have an individual in the spectrum, think about you saving for your personal retirement and theirs as well. Because if you're not equipped to be employed, you need to make sure that there's support or money set aside for them. Um, Depending on your age, I'll use a 60 as an example. So assuming you're 60 years old, you'd be, if you get another 30 years, that puts you on 90, or even 40 years, 100. I'm being quite optimistic there. That's time that you can save. That's a long time that you need to save money for yourself. But once you're gone, because all of us at some point are going to be gone, right? So once you, the adult, is gone, you have to put structures in place to support the individual that you've left behind. You don't want them to be a burden on their siblings. The siblings go through a lot already. So we want to make sure that we've put things in place to support the individuals, our loved ones. So don't just think about your retirement, but think about theirs as well. So you're planning for your retirement as well as theirs. It's crucial that you do that. Excuse me. Let's see here. And then when you parent a child on the spectrum, certain things you cannot take for granted. So, and I'm sure it's been touched on somewhere along the line today. You have to make sure that you have a support system. So guardians are crucial for our individuals on the spectrum. You need to make sure you have guardians. You need to make sure they're spending time with your individual so they know them and can assist you. Sometimes it may be just a simple trip to a doctor's office, or you have a procedure that needs to be done. If you don't have people that are familiar with your child's program or what they do, it becomes extremely burdensome for whomever is at home, having to juggle work and the other siblings. And so it's best to, if you don't have anything, perhaps create a folder and put in all the things that work, all the structures, what you do. So from their daily living skills to if there's medication involved, medication that they use, to where funds have been put for them. So just make sure you put things in place, um, in a folder, online, store it somewhere, and have give the guardians access to that information. A guardian or two is always wise to have. Excuse me. While you do that, also sometimes the guardians are people you can put on investment accounts as people that can oversee the welfare of your young ones or adults in the event that something happens. Um, so that's important. But again, the goal is to make sure we're building long-term strategies, we're building long-term plans for ourselves and the next generation. They are the next generation. So regardless of what situation they find themselves in, you have to plan for them as well. The next generation, and we need to make sure we're supporting them. That support also goes for our non typical neurotypical children. So we have to do that for them as well. Okay. We need to make sure we have wills in place. If you don't have a will, make sure you have wills in place. You've designated your guardians, you have your beneficiaries on your accounts. It's all important. Excuse me here. Let's see here. Uh, Excuse me. So then we talk about some planning is critical. That's what we just went over. Lifelong costs. Caring for individuals on the spectrum is a lifelong cost. So it doesn't change. And with increasing costs, services increase, everything increases as well. So planning is essential. You can't forego that. Therapies, medications, caregiver income protection at some point when you retire. Um, if you haven't put things in place, then where are the funds going to come to support you and that individual? You have to do, depending on the country you are and what kind of access you have, you might want to speak to a lawyer about setting up an estate account. You do some estate planning. In the US, that's easy. You can find an estate planning attorney very easily, and they can help you. They'll help you with guardianship planning. I mentioned that earlier. And then generational financial stability is what I talked about, putting structures in place to help. If you're somebody that's employed by an organization, perhaps in our instances, especially with families who have children on the spectrum, I say that you want to have more than one stream of income. So you're employed by someone, meaning that your job security is not 100% guaranteed. You want to find ways to make some extra income on the side. So everybody talks about side hustles now. You want to have things on the side so that assuming things don't work well where you're employed, you have something to fall back on while you're looking again, right? So several streams of income to support the family is key. We have special needs children, meaning that we're special. I say that to all my friends or people that I know on the spectrum, or I mean families. I say, we have special needs children, but we're special too. And this should give us opportunities to create things that people don't normally think about, right? So if you don't have an individual on the spectrum, you're not thinking about, excuse me, making sure you have other streams of income. You're thinking, oh, I have a job, I'm okay, maybe one side hustle. But when you have someone that's solely dependent, they can't be working, they're not working, then that puts you in a situation to plan ahead and plan for them and find other sources of income. So it's crucial that you have that mindset of finding other ways to get income in. You don't want to deplete your savings in your old age when you cannot work and you need care yourself, you need medical assistance, and you've depleted your resources. How then do you support another individual? And you cannot rely on or think that you can rely on benefits from any state or governmental agencies. That's not a guarantee. So you have to have ways of putting something on the side, even if it's little. Delayed retirement planning. So I mentioned that earlier too. When people are planning for their retirement, we can't. We have to keep working. We have to have strategies in place. Um, I'll use myself as an example. I tell people, I at this point in my life, I should be trying to retire. People are like, why are you doing all these other things? I said, well, I have an individual on the spectrum. She may be able to work to a certain level, but not enough to support her. And the cost of living is expensive depending on what part of the nation you're in. So that means that I'll have to work for a long time. I might even have to work if I live to 90, work till my 90th birthday. So, um, if you have that mindset that you got to keep working, you cannot retire, right? So I'm thinking, perhaps certain fields will not hire you over a certain age. So you have to be strategic about areas where you can work to 70, 80. When you're a physician, unless your sight is bad and you're not really fine with your motor systems and cannot perform surgeries, you can work. You go to doctors sometimes and they're in their 70s and they can work. They're not forced to retire. Sometimes people are in their 80s and if cognitively they're fine, they're able to work. You can be a professor. So you have to start looking at ways that you can keep working to support that individual. Or supplement them. So if it's to be a lecturer, if you're a lecturer, once you have the knowledge and you can teach to whatever age. Um, you can be in your 80s and teach. So you have to explore what fields that you can work in your old age as well. So delayed retirement is what it's what I mean by that. You cannot plan to retire like everybody else. Especially when the person you're supporting is not capable of working and making sufficient income for themselves. Um, Let's see here. I think I talked about investment strategies also. And in cases where you don't have sufficient information, reach out to people that are in that sphere that can support you, that can give you information. Investment, there are products that can support people on this with disabilities. So if you speak to an investment professional, you have a financial planner, they're able to help you look for tools that will help your family. Okay, losing government benefits. Well, we spoke about that. Right now, the government benefits are being slashed everywhere, so they're not things you can rely on. Um, here, excuse me, sorry. Here are some stuff, tools that I would like you to take away and things that you could look at. Depending on where you're located, you might want to look at special niche trust. So you find an attorney and talk to them about creating a special niche trust. Sometimes, if you don't have the assets to put in the trust, you may be advised to explore insurance products to put in that life insurance products. And so they can guide you there. Then there's long-term care planning. We've spoken about that extensively. There are investment strategies that your financial planners or supporters can help you with as a family. Every family or every individual um, has what they're comfortable with, what kind of risk they're able to take, their risk tolerance, what kind of funds they want to put away. So everybody's different. And so you need to speak to someone and go through what you're comfortable with so that you can plan accordingly. Um, let's see here. I think we touched on all those there. And then supporting families through financial strategy, like I said, explore companies or organizations that can help you. Spend some time looking out for companies that can support you. Um, so I mentioned earlier on, I'm a co-founder of a company, Doxa Partners, and I support individuals. And I tend to focus on us with people on the spectrum is important. Um, but depending on where you are, if you reach out to me and you need guidance, I may be able to say, okay, in Ghana, I know this and that person that can assist you. In this other country, um, I've been to Egypt, so I've got some friends in there. We can explore who can assist you. So if you need help, seek out help. It doesn't have to be from me, it can be from anyone, but just seek help in finding those people that can support you plan accordingly. Okay, excuse me. And what makes disability financial planning different? So now, because we've spoken about the family level, and I think I touched on some governmental or national level issues, but the cost is exorbitant for families and for governments and for um, politicians. So politicians always want to see what's in it for them, right? So why would they be pushing your autism agenda, or why would they be wanting to support you? What's in for them? Uh, they want votes. When they support you, is it going to get them votes, right? So we have to be able to position our stories in such a way that politicians legislators are willing to speak to us and willing to support us. In some instances, we actually have to dig out those who have family members that are impacted. Those are the ones that tend to be your champions. When they have a family member impacted, they're more apt to wanting to support and help. So we have to look for those individuals that can help us champion the work that we're doing. Um, Government benefits preservation in economies where they have money to support the benefits, great. You can think about strategies to preserve them. But right now, the way the global economy is going, there's not money anywhere. And so we have to find ways to create different products. Uh, in my little corner here, I've found a few people and we're discussing things that we can put in place to to take care of some of the services that are being taken away. So we all have to be creative, find like-minded people, people that are impacted by your situations, and spend time, even if it's meeting once a week, meet and come up with ideas on how you can support your individuals long term. Caregiver retirement protection, we've spoken about it. Multi-generational planning, I've spoken about it to some extent. One thing that I said earlier on in the conversation was we don't want to burden siblings with um, the other children on the spectrum. It's unfair to the siblings. They already have difficult lives as it is dealing with an individual at home. Um, on the spectrum. As much as it's a blessing to them, they learn so much. Like when my children go places, people can tell they're very empathetic, they're kind, they're loving. It's because they've just been caregivers. I don't force them to be caregivers, but they're in the situation and so they know how to help. So there's been benefits to them, but it's also stressful. So as adults, we don't want to burden, it's not their responsibility. So some way you can plan multi-generational involving your other children is if you want them to step in, perhaps if you have assets or things that you plan to give them, you tie it to supporting their sibling. So if your child A, if I give you a little cube or this box here, then you're going to support your brother or sibling to some extent if you want that, right? So give them incentives to want to do it so that they don't feel they're burdened. They have the choice. I want this thing my parents want to give me, and so I'm willing to support my sibling. Those are some multi-generational plannings that you can do. Find ways to be an entrepreneur. So we spoke about that because that's how you can extend, the generational wealth as well. Working for someone all the time is not going to give you that. So find ways to add some kind of entrepreneurship to your life. Cross-border financial planning. So depending on where you live, sometimes you're able to explore. You have to. You're able to explore what other countries have. So look for neighboring countries, and if you're able to invest in their product and it will earn you a bit more, and they allow it, why not explore it and invest in there? So you could be in the UK, and if you research and find out that you can invest in the US market in certain things, go ahead. You can invest in Nigeria, Ghana, do that, extend your tentacles. Look for ways that you can you can diversify your portfolio or your assets. And I think here I already mentioned what my organization does. We help people with financial planning, long-term care, retirement, cross-continental planning, financial literacy education workshops. Um, and Doxa also tries to partner with organizations. So if you have an organization that needs someone to come talk to your family members about financial planning, reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to let someone come speak to them. If it's not myself, one of the partners or the team members will be happy to come discuss with them what they need to be looking out for and planning. Use us. We're here to support each other. Likewise, if you have an organization and I feel I can benefit from you or need something from you, I'll be more than happy to reach out. So don't hesitate. We're a community by ourselves and we need to support each other. Free resources. So I mentioned there's an autism financial planning starter guide. You must have a financial readiness checklist. I did talk about that guardianship booklet or folder that you need to create to make sure you've got things in place um, to share with other people. Caregiver retirement planning worksheet, you want to put those in place. And keep, sometimes you have to have some difficult conversations with family members, with spouses, with siblings about what you would like to see for this individual. Um, Instead of birthday presents for them, that money could be put into some kind of investment property. You might find something small that you could use that money for. So let's find ways of creating sustainable income flows for our individuals on the spectrum. I think I already mentioned a few times before we started that this presentation was for educational purposes only. It doesn't constitute individual financial planning advice. And then call to action. That's always important. As parents, as providers, stakeholders, we have to come together and help push the agenda forward. Most things that some of us are benefiting in the countries that we're in were fought by parents. They were parent led. So we have to lead and champion whatever changes we want to see wherever we are on the continent. So on a country level, find a group of families and come together and champion what you want to see, the changes you'd like to see. Um, Workforce development, in as much as we can, we work to make sure we're developing our kids and not just our kids too, but those who support them. So let's make sure we have things in place to support them. I'm for making sure that our individuals on the spectrum thrive and work. They are very talented, so it's up to us to find where their talents are and help them in those instances. It might take a few more steps than a neurotypical kid, but they're brilliant individuals. They're very smart. I think most of the time we're the ones that underestimate them. We underestimate their level. They're super, super smart. And so let's make sure we support them so that they can be gainfully employed, so that first identify what they want to do. I have some gentleman that I was speaking to. He's nonverbal, he communicates with spelling, and he wants to help with making movies. And so what we've done is we're looking for an organization that can hire him. He loves movies so much, and I can see him doing well for Disney or some country, I mean, some organization. So let's identify those things too so we can help them be gainfully employed. And then community collaboration, that was woven through the discussion. Let's collaborate. Collaboration is key. And we've discussed financial empowerment. So that's the call to action. That's what we need to do. Thank you very much. I think I wanted to make sure we had enough time for questions, and we do have a few minutes, so I'll open it up for questions.
Wow, thank you so much. We will proceed to questions at once. We have about 3 questions for you. One is from Kojo. Kojo says, which financial burdens impact families the most over time?
Ooh, which one? I would say the cost of education. The education is extremely costly. Yes. For the most part, if your individual doesn't have comorbid issues and it's just the autism diagnosis, then you don't have to worry about healthcare or healthcare needs, medical needs. But it's the education because we want to equip them to be self-sustainable, to be able to work. So that's very expensive. I think you're muted.
Okay, so I need to pull up the next question. If you would help me stop sharing your screen
Oh,
in a
sure.
bit. Okay, thank you. So
Okay.
the next one is from Aisha. Aisha says, how does financial stress affect long-term outcomes for children and families? How does financial stress affect long-term outcomes for children and their families?
Financial stress affects the outcomes long term overall in certain areas. So if you're fight, I'd like to say that if the family members are stressed, right? They're not really in a position to support their children well. I can
That's right.
tell when my stress level is high, my daughter doesn't respond to me adequately. I don't get the results from her because they're very smart and they can tell. So when you're stressed out, you're not able to support them as much as you want to.
Adequately.
You think you're doing the work, you're helping them, but they can tell. So you're not getting the same impact. The results will not be the same. Also, um, your well-being is important. So when you're financially stressed, you're not in a frame of mind to help anybody else. You can
That's
pour
true.
from an empty cup. So stress brings on a lot of illnesses. And so financial stress can give you unnecessary illnesses that you don't want. So we have to find ways to mitigate it. It's difficult, but we do have to find ways to prioritize our well-being so we can support well.
Okay. Uh, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Not you.
Okay, the last question is from Samuel, and he says, what practical steps can communities take to reduce economic barriers?
What steps can communities take?
To
Depending on,
reduce economic barriers.
yeah, so depending on, this is how I like to structure this. Depending on where you are. So in the US, we have the insurance, healthcare insurance. And the
Yeah.
reason why people buy into healthcare insurance is because it makes the cost or the burden less, right? Because
Yes,
we're
yeah.
all chipping in. And so instead of maybe party A paying $1,000, you're paying $10, and everybody pays into that pool, and we all dip in when needed, right?
Needed,
In
yeah.
certain societies, they have something that's even called susu, right? Where people come together and they put money together, and when a person needs it, they can draw from it.
That's
The
right.
same approach can be utilized within economies, right? Within small segments. So, depending on your town or your community, that's why I talked about collaboration and how we need to come together as parents, find like-minded people who are impacted by the same thing, and say, hey, somebody has to take the lead,
That's
obviously.
right.
But we need to identify a leader in that group and say, hey, let's do this together. You get a leader in a group of you, and you come together and put in things that will support. So it might be funds. You come together and put funding together to support. It might be getting medical support like therapies. You
Yeah,
identify physicians or people that you can go to. So every time you go to a group, as you go to a provider as a group, they're able to give you better pricing. So if 10 of us decide that we want to go to Dr. A for therapy, we can then negotiate a better price because we're bringing lots of clients, right? And they see value in that and they're willing to work with you. So on I think that there's several ways, depending on what you try, the targeted issue, come together, and then as a unit, you're able to negotiate better pricing or better deals for yourself.
thank you so much for being with us today. It's been an honor having you, Lynn. Um, we will now proceed to the next segment of this forum. And thank you so much for being
Thank
here.
you. Thank you for the
It's been
time.
an amazing time.
Thank you.